Welcome to Tips to Master Standardized Testing. We will be talking about the SAT and ACT undergraduate exams, as well as the GRE graduate exam. My name is Jenica Heim, and I'm the Education USA Advisor in Canada, and I'm joined with Rodrigo. Hi, Rodrigo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rodrigo de los Santos from Education USA Mérida in Mexico, and I'll be presenting the GRE section of this presentation.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jenica.
All right, thanks, Rodrigo. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started by talking about the SAT and ACT. And the first thing we're going to chat about is the similarities and differences between the two exams. So in the United States, as part of the admissions process, many schools will require you to submit either SAT or ACT scores, and most schools will also allow you to choose which one you'd like to take. And that is truly a choice. No one is considered better or worse than the other. And so you'll want to line up the tests and consider which one might be best for you. The SAT and ACT are governed by two different organizations. So to learn more, you'll go to the collegeboard.org for the SAT and the ACT website, which is act.org or actstudent.org. The two tests are scored really differently. The SAT has two sections. Both of them have a scaled score of up to 800 points for a total of 1,600, whereas the ACT has four sections that are 36 scaled points each, and then you get a composite score, which is an average, and it's scaled to 36 as well. It doesn't mean that there's only 36 questions. It means that they scale down the score into that total. The format is really different if you're taking the test internationally. The SAT is still a standard pencil paper exam, whereas the ACT is a computer-based test. That does not mean you get to take it at home on your computer. You would need to go into a testing center that has the exam on a computer. The ACT has slightly more questions. They're similar in time, about 3 hours each. You might want to take into consideration the cost, which is around $100 to $150. And if you want to do the essay, that would be an additional $15. Both exams have a Saturday testing day, but the ACT also has a Friday testing option, which can be really useful for some students. Both exams have a lot in common. They both have reading exams, English exams, which is called the Writing and Language Test on the SAT. They both have math that go up to about a grade 11 level. The SAT has a no calculator math section, whereas the ACT does not. And the ACT is the only test that has a science section. When it comes to breaking out the timing for each test, they're slightly different as well. I won't go into too much in depth here, but if you're going to practice taking the exams, you'll want to follow the exact structure of test day. One of the biggest things you'll notice is the ACT just has that 1 10-minute break where the SAT gave you 2 breaks. But overall, the timing is somewhat similar. Here's some of your upcoming test dates. You'll find this information at the test makers' websites, as I mentioned, collegeboard.org or act.org. Due to COVID-19, there's more testing available in the fall than there is normally, including an added September 26th testing date for the SAT, which will be an SAT-only test. The College Board also governs the SAT subject tests, so you'll see here when I say subject test only or both, it means you can choose one or the other on that day. We won't get into subject tests today, but do reach out to your Education USA advisor if you have more questions about subject exams. So what test should I take? I get this question very often. So a couple of ways I ask students to consider what test can be best. How did you like the ACT science section? That's one thing that's really different between the two tests. So if you want a quick way to see which one could be a good fit, take a science test and see if you're drawn to it or not, and if you have a really strong opinion about it. Do you prefer a pencil paper test or a test on a computer? If you, again, have a very strong feeling one way or another, that might help you determine which test could be a good fit for you. Don't underestimate if you have a test center near you and what upcoming test date works best. You should really start by going to the test maker's website and seeing where your closest testing center is. You'll find that sometimes you might have an SAT center that you can walk to, and the nearest ACT center might be 7 hours away. In that case, the one that's closest to you is going to be your best fit, and you might want to consider taking that test. We'll go now into a few tips on how to study for these tests. So first you want to think about your free resources. You can use the khanacademy.org for the SAT or the ACT Academy for the ACT. These are amazingly robust free resources that will help you with your overall content and understanding what's going to be on the exams. As you saw, these exams are long, they're 3 hours, and even though they test the kinds of things you learn in school, it's really different than any test you ever take in school, and the way the questions are outlined. And if you're not a native English speaker, then also things like math, even if you are maybe someone who's more drawn to math, now you're dealing with math in terms of English concepts. So it's really important to also be practicing within the context of English language if that's not your first language. Couple other free resources, some of the largest test makers. So in the United States, not test makers, test prep organizations. In the United States, Kaplan and Princeton Review provide a lot of free resources, both online and through your phone. So I suggest downloading apps from these organizations where you can do a question of the day and start just practicing what it's like to answer these questions in a low stakes circumstance. So every day you can get on there and really practice trying to improve, and then work your way up to what makes the most sense for you. Books usually cost between $20 and $30, and then anything past that is going to cost more money. So you have to start thinking about how much of an investment you want to make on your SAT and ACT practice. You can pay for online content, you can take classes, sometimes in person, but usually online. And then also you could pay for tutoring, which of course is the most individualized, but will also be the most costly of the options. When you get started with studying, the most important thing to do is to take a practice test right away. I know that can feel really scary, but when you sit down and take a full-length timed practice test, you will find right away the things that you're already doing well at and the things that you know you really will need to work on. You'll start to feel what time management is like and see how well you do on that without any practice, and it will help shape your practice. Once you take that test, self-score it so that you can really get a sense of, again, how well you did, and also when you see your wrong answers, go and see the mistakes you made so that you can learn from those mistakes. During this process, you can also research some score ranges for goal schools. On websites like collegeboard.org, they have really great college search functions that allow you to put in your test scores that you've received. And of course, on your first time, you would hope that from there you'll improve. But you can start to get a better sense of how close you are to those goal schools you're looking at. When you are thinking about how to study, start answering some of the following questions. What's my target score? How far am I from that score? As well as, how do I usually study? So if you're somebody who needs a group to study or a coach, then maybe something like a class environment might work best for you, or a study group. If you're more independently minded, then maybe that Khan Academy and some of those and books and things like that are going to work really well for you. Consider what learning environments you like best, and also how much money I'm willing to invest. Because you can have very specialized assistance through these exams, but of course that would take a larger investment in your money. Luckily, there's a lot of really great free resources available to you as well. The biggest thing that you need to consider when it comes to these tests, as I already mentioned, is time management. So you'll need to practice that as well. So here's some tips on practicing time management. First, practice concepts and techniques. And what I mean by that is concepts being the actual material on the exam. So what are you actually being tested in math? What is the grammar concepts that you'll be asked to know? Then also practice some techniques. So if you've learned any test-taking strategies on how to approach those questions, which might be things like you might learn from an Education USA advisor like myself. I run some events with my students about helping them with techniques on the exam, and I know a lot of EdUSA advisors do something similar. Then after you've practiced a lot of your concepts and techniques and you're starting to feel a little more comfortable about a particular subject matter, do what I call a timed sprint. So you could do a full section. So let's say a reading comprehension section, 65 minutes. So you could take a test and just do that one section for 65 minutes. Or you can even break it up into smaller passages. And for 13 minutes, do one passage and see how you do and practice like that. And then after you've done that enough time, start taking some full length tests. And you're going to start building up. I like to think of it like if you're an athlete or you're a musician, you have to create some muscle memory in the same way. So you have to do a little bit of weightlifting, a little bit of practice, but then you also need to do a scrimmage. You need to do a full length practice prior to taking the exam. Try to create test-like environments. So use the right timing, try to find a quiet space. Wear a watch. So when you take the exam, you're not allowed to use a digital or smartwatch, but you can use an old school watch with a face. And I suggest turning it to 12 at the beginning of each section so that you know exactly how much time you will have left. You'll find that if you're sitting in a classroom, you're usually not at your school. And if the clock is behind you, you won't be able to turn around and look at it because it might look like you're cheating. And so it's really great for you to practice having a watch and using it. Break down how much time you'll need per question so you can start to get an understanding of how long you're taking and if you're spending too long on a question. Most sections on the SAT or ACT allow for a minute or less per question. You have to move pretty quickly. So obviously that's an average, but if you find you're taking 5 minutes on a question, that's far too long. So that's a critical skill to practice. Some other things to bear in mind: easy and hard questions are all worth 1 point. So if you're up against a difficult one, skip it, come back to it. Make sure you gather all the easier points that you can, questions that you're finding easy for yourself. You don't need to do the questions in order. Feel free to attack them however way you want. You can, if you're in the reading comprehension section, skip around and go to which passage you're kind of attracted to the most. Don't feel like you have to do them in exact order. Flip through the whole section to get a lay of the land and create a testing strategy. I think one thing students often feel is that the test is kind of owning them. If you take your time to go through your section, which you can do better on a paper test like the SAT, you'll get a sense of what you're dealing with, and then you can choose how to approach it. There are no wrong answer penalties on the SAT or ACT, so you should always, always, always guess and use a guessing strategy. We're going to go ahead and stop there for SAT and ACT, and we're going to switch over now to Rodrigo to talk about the GRE.
Thanks so much for those wonderful tips, Jenica. That was a great presentation. And as you will see, many of the tips that Jessica just mentioned are going to be applicable to the GRE. So let's start with the first thing. I think that 50% of the battle is understanding the structure and the overall information that's required from you in order to approach the GRE. So the GRE is it stands for the Graduate Record Examinations, and it's a standardized exam that is requested by many graduate programs in the US. It is a requisite for admission. So the first step for you is first to learn if your institution is asking for the GRE. Some institutions ask for them, some of them not, especially now given the current COVID situation. So please, the first step you have to take is to see if your institution, your university is asking you to take the GRE. As I said, it is really, really important to learn what you are asked in the exam. Like in many exams, this is particularly important because in the GRE, you're gonna notice that maybe what you've learned in school in terms of verbal reasoning or quantitative reasoning is not exactly using the same terminology that you might have learned, especially if you are an international student, okay? So there's also different GRE subject tests. They're not as popular as the main GRE test, but again, you have to reach out your university to see if they are asking for any of these particular versions of the GRE test. You have subject tests such as biology, chemistry, literature, English, etc. Okay, so who takes the GRE? The GRE is taken by prospective graduate and business school applicants all over the world, interested either in a master's and a specialized master's in business, MAs, PhDs, etc. So this is basically an exam aimed at postgraduate students. Sorry, so how to register? Well, the first thing you have to do is to create an account. So you can go to ets.org/mygre, and please pay special attention to the instructions, because it's extremely important that your personal information coincides with your official ID that you're going to show at the test center. It is very important that your full name appears as it is in your official photo ID, because otherwise it might create some problems. You'll have to email and contact them if you want to make any changes after you've created your account. And bear in mind that it's extremely important that you remember your username and password. Just keep them in a safe space, because then if you lose them, it's kind of complicated. You know, you have to justify that you're the same person that registered, especially if you've taken the test and you want to request additional scores. It might be problematic. So just please keep your username and password in a safe place. Don't forget about them. Okay, so what to bring to the exam? There are two versions of the GRE. There is the online or the computer-based version. For that, you only need to bring to the test site an official ID with photo and your ticket that you will get after you register on your email. And for the paper version, you need to bring pencils. I would suggest to bring several pencils. You know, you don't want to spend time sharpening your pencils or anything. But in case, also bring a sharpener, an eraser, and do not bring any smartphones or calculators, because you're going to be able to use them. At the test site, you're going to be provided with a calculator, a very simple calculator. So the structure, this is extremely important, as I mentioned before, and I will be emphasizing this throughout the presentation. It is very, very important for you to understand the structure and to dominate. As Jenica mentioned, for the SAT and ACT, time management is a big deal. And this also applies to the GRE. You have to manage your time extremely well. And the only way you can do that is if you know in advance how the GRE procedure will operate at the test center. So in general, the GRE is divided in two big sections. You have the verbal reasoning and the quantitative reasoning. And there is a minor section, which is the analytic writing, which I'll talk a little bit at the end of this presentation. The scores for the verbal and the quantitative reasoning goes from 150 to 170 points. It is also reported in percentiles. And in percentiles means that particular score will be compared to all the test takers in this particular generation or this year. And then you're gonna see where in that percentage are you located at. I would say, and this is one of the questions that I get frequently at my center is, so Rodrigo, what's a competitive score? And that varies depending on your institution, how demanding it is, how rigid in terms of scores. But in my experience, I would say that a score above 160 can be considered competitive. Of course, if the ideal is to reach as close as 170 as possible, but 160 is considered competitive overall. And the analytic writing section goes from 1 to 6 points. Okay, so the verbal reasoning, what is this verbal reasoning thing? So in general, it measures your ability to analyze and draw conclusions from discourse, to reason with data, understand multiple levels of meaning. You have to be aware that vocabulary, as we will see, is extremely important for you to have a good score in this section, because in order for you to analyze arguments, to understand the different layers of meaning in a particular paragraph, in a particular sentence, you really have to have a strong vocabulary. That's the foundation for this section, the vocabulary. And there are different strategies. I'm going to be talking a little bit about them. But again, the strong foundation that you can have starts with your vocabulary. You have to learn new words every day. So this section is divided in two, 20 questions each section, and the time per section is 30 minutes. There are three different tasks in the verbal reasoning section. You have text completion, you have sentence equivalence, and reading comprehension. And again, in each of these sections, vocabulary is the foundation. I can suggest you, as I've taken the GRE, I think at least a couple of times. The first time, of course, was not as optimal as I wanted to. That's when I learned the importance of having a strong vocabulary. So now, to your advantage, there are many free apps that you can download to create flashcards. And some people like to have the physical flashcards. That's perfectly fine. You can just go to the internet and look for, if you use Google GRE words, you're gonna have several websites that will suggest you which words are more common in the GRE, which words are common in general in graduate studies. So you can build your own vocabulary. You can create your own flashcards. Also, if you go to your phone, you can download applications specifically targeted for GRE, where you can find these common words. You don't need to write anything, that you already have the database, and you can practice whenever. They're very, very practical. So that's a great advantage that you guys have now. I encourage you to try to look for these apps and to build your own vocabulary in your flashcards. As I mentioned, memorize new words every day. If you're watching a film, if you're watching a series and you hear the new fancy word that you were not familiar with, write it down, look for the meaning. That's a good strategy. That is going to take you the entire test preparation time. Since day one up until the day that you're gonna be taking the test, you have to be practicing every single day new words, okay? In Latin America, and as well as other parts of the world, we have what's called false cognates, words that might sound similar in English to your language, but have different meanings. So pay attention to those words. It can get tricky, especially when you're analyzing arguments, where you're trying to find the right word to fill the blanks. So bear in mind these false cognates. And the quantitative reasoning, it measures the ability to understand and analyze quantitative information. You're required to solve basic mathematical problems and apply concepts from algebra, arithmetic, geometry, and data analysis. In this particular section, the base of everything, in my opinion, is arithmetic and algebra. As I said with the verbal reasoning section, vocabulary is the foundation. Here is arithmetic and algebra. So it's time for you to brush on those high school books, to remember your operations, to remember the famous PEMDAS, the law of the exponents, everything. So that's the foundation of the quantitative section. Some people freak out that they think that, oh, they're gonna ask me about calculus or analytic geometry, those topics that you might cover in high school, but that's not necessarily the case. And we'll see in a bit what do you need to pay attention to. This section again is divided in two parts, 20 questions each, and the time per section is 35 minutes. So this is what I was talking about. This is roughly the percentages of information that you need to study in order to approach this quantitative reasoning part. This information comes from the official guide to the GRE. It gives you like an estimate of the types of questions that you're going to be answering in the GRE. As you can see, by far, data analysis is a very important aspect of this quantitative reasoning part. But of course, you might remember that in order for you to understand and to analyze data, you have to have a strong foundation in algebra and arithmetic. So just practice is all I can say in this section. Remember your basic algebra. Just pay attention to the official guides. If you have any in-depth questions regarding what particular topics in algebra, geometry, and arithmetic they want you to study, you can visit the official website at ets.org/GRE. And finally, the analytical writing section, it measures critical thinking, analytical writing skills. This is very related to certain aspects of the verbal reasoning section. You have to build, you have to understand, and you have to criticize certain arguments. In this section, it is important to emphasize that there are no wrong answers. You're going to be offered a couple of tasks. One, you're going to be analyzing an issue, and another, you're going to be analyzing an argument. And it doesn't matter your position. What matters is that you show that you understood the topic, you understood the problem, you synthesized the information, and you provided enough logic, reasoning, and premises that support a general conclusion one way or the other. So there are no wrong answers. The focus on this particular section is not about the answer itself, but about the methodology that you're going to be using. Okay? So in this section, you have 60 minutes. It's two sections, one for the analyzing section of an argument, and then the analyzing issue of an argument. Okay, and in a broad summary of this presentation, for your quantitative reasoning, the math review has to focus on arithmetic and algebra, and the verbal reasoning has to focus on vocabulary. Flashcards, flashcards, flashcards. That's the best tip I can offer you. Become familiar with the structure, the questions, and again, I refer back to the official website. Given time constraints, I cannot in depth as I would like to in this particular presentation, but there are many, many free resources out there for you. The first one is the official GRE website, where you can learn more about the topics, the specific details of each section that you need to focus on. And as Jenica mentioned, it's extremely important for you to take practice exams, simulate time constraint conditions. So you can, I suggest a couple of weeks probably before the exam, just focus entirely on practice exams with clock. It's important for you to simulate as much as possible the time constraints, because that's going to generate stress that you have to learn how to deal with. And have many students that they practice a lot of their math review and they have like really great vocabulary, but they don't practice enough on their time constraints, and they get stressed at the test site, so it doesn't go well. So please practice using a watch. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you so much. Thanks for your attention, Jenica.
Thanks, Rodrigo. That was great information, and a lot of it overlaps indeed. So for math, for the exams, it's the same thing for SAT, ACT. And I didn't mention previously, but for those tests, do not study vocabulary. It is not a big part of the SAT or ACT. So that's a big, big difference. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have more questions and want to find your local Education USA advisor, reach out via educationusa.state.gov, and you can find the advisor near you, and they can help you with any in-country resources they have regarding test preparation. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.